Hi, I'm Harvajala.
And I'm Brock McDonald. Welcome to this episode of RCBC TV. Today we're going to talk about food waste, composting, organics, that type of thing. It's something that we all deal with and on so many levels.
That's right, Brock. Now I'm going to start off with an article that I read in Biocycle magazine, and it contained a graphic for a hierarchy to reduce food waste and grow community.
Oh.
And the visual was from a composting conference that was originally held in LA. And the focus is to highlight locally based composting solutions as a first priority over large-scale regional solutions.
Well, that sounds like a good approach.
Yeah, and there were some additions to the hierarchy, specifically putting the focus on composting as close as possible to where the food waste is being produced. So home composting is the preferred method, and for municipalities that can cut down on the collection costs. And then the small-scaled, decentralized, and community composting, where you're either composting, food waste that you're producing yourself, or just collecting it from within your community. And these composting options, they keep the food waste close by, hopefully within the same postal code, and that facilitates using the final composting product in soils within the community to grow food. You can use it to manage stormwater, and it creates jobs and economic opportunities.
Well, that sounds like some good solutions, but there's solutions that are sort of near the end of the pipe. And the thing about preventing waste before it happens, in most other things, we apply design for environment. But that's difficult to do in the food issue. We can apply planning and habits to prevent waste. And maybe that's one of the focuses that we should be looking at.
Well, exactly. So at the top of the chart, of course, is the source reduction and then edible food rescue. As Canadians, we're still producing a lot of food waste, about 6 million tons annually.
Wow.
So for each of us, that's 183 kilograms per person.
And that's pretty close to the American standard too, because according to a chart I read recently, it's about 400 pounds. And they don't do metric. So but that translates to about 183 kilograms.
There you go, yeah. And the interesting part of that is that almost half of that is happening right at home. The other half occurs when food is processed for sale or in restaurants. But we have a large impact by the way we shop, and it adds up to a lot of money. It's about $31 billion in food waste just within Canada.
Oh yeah, tons of money, tons of waste. But it's good to recognize that. But waste happens at all levels of the food chain, right from the farmer's field to the point where you're scraping off, your dinner plate into the compost bin. It's across the board. Yeah,
and what we want to encourage, of course, is prevention. So, reducing portions, buying what you need, preparing, enough. It's not always a great idea to have leftovers. Who wants to eat spaghetti all week? Right? So after prevention, of course, is the edible food rescue. And that's saving food that could still be used to feed people. Or if it's not food that's suitable for human consumption, then using it, maybe to feed backyard chickens or livestock, so it's still being used. And there was an interesting pilot project that started back in 2013 in Quebec.
Right.
And it was a network of food banks, and they started a centralized supermarket recovery program. So what they did is they provided grocery stores with black boxes where they could put still edible and reusable food. And then the supermarket recovery program would pick up the boxes on a scheduled day with their refrigerated trucks, and then they would be responsible for distributing this food to the individual food banks. This way for the grocery stores, it was easy because they didn't have to work with multiple food banks, multiple pick. You know what I mean? It was just one box, one system, very organized, very simple to manage.
That approach is really... It's consistent with the kind of discussions we've had out here, because the stores, they want a system that's simple, but yet the food banks need to have a certain amount of coordination. And so a centralized system like that provides that level of simplicity for the producer and coordination for the food banks and the agencies.
Exactly. And then when it's being managed, everybody knows, what's coming in, what's going out, and you're better able to make sure that the food is going where it needs to be. And that program in Quebec has been quite successful. They've collected nearly $20 million worth of grocery through 177 supermarkets.
Okay.
And what they're doing is they're continuing to grow and expand the program, and they're hoping to see 611 supermarkets divert an estimated 8 million kilograms of food when it's fully operational. So I mean, that goes a long way into dipping into those big numbers we're talking about.
It does, and there are other agencies that are working on measures that would help as well as that. So for instance, in British Columbia, we've had some conversation with food banks here trying to gather information for an initiative that the National Zero Waste Council was putting forth. So now they've had some conversation. The council has had conversation with the federal government, trying to get them to apply a standard for Canadian Revenue Agency to have a donation receipt available for stores that donate. And if you think about, France took this even a step further. They made it mandatory that grocery stores in France can no longer just dispose of food. They have to donate it. They have to plan to donate it. So it's a national system there.
And that's great. I mean, that idea with the National Zero Waste Council, that really incentivizes grocery stores to want to jump on board, right? And BC food banks, are looking to that example in Quebec to have a similar program implemented here. Food banks currently have to turn down supermarkets and farmers because they just don't have the storage space for perishables like, say milk and eggs.
Yeah, and oftentimes they'll just get something sprung on them and they're really not prepared to accept it.
Exactly. Yeah. They just don't have the resources to handle that large volume. But right now, Food Banks BC is asking the province for a $10 million grant so that they can purchase fridges and freezers and be able to store perishables and larger volumes of food. And that would really work towards reducing that 6 million tons that are currently going to landfill and produce, increased food security for a lot more Canadians.
Exactly. So, like I said before, there needs to be a certain level of coordination there. That really seems to help. And, you take some of those other measures that were not necessarily what France has done, but, I think it goes a long way to have that receipt through the CRA to provide that incentive. But, we all have to deal with this. Like I was saying before, it's at every level.
Yeah.
And so here's a couple of tips that I use at home. So, for instance, you can use your freezer to your best advantage. So when I cut up vegetables, I save the onion bums and the carrot nubs and that kind of stuff and the ends of the celery, keep them in a bag, and then when I have enough, because you put some in every day, I have enough, you make a vegetable stock. In the meantime, I've been collecting, vegetables from meals, vegetables, meat, and rice and pasta in separate containers in the freezer. And eventually, I've got enough to make a soup. And you can make your stock, and you can freeze that as well. And so you can literally just make a can of soup if you have the right ingredients, right? You just add a few things, and it becomes second nature after a while. But believe me, it has really reduced my food waste.
Yeah, and it goes down, it goes back to that whole, planning and preparing and, having it, being a little bit organized. I mean, in doing that will, not even just save the landfills, saves money in your pocketbook.
Oh, absolutely.
It saves your waistline. I mean...
Sure, so like I can whip up a stew for 2 people now, but you always end up with a little bit left over, right? But you take that and you can make a great beef and barley soup out of it, right? Because you just add some vegetables, if and a little bit of barley, and you're good to go.
There you go. That's awesome, Brock.
So we're going to hear a lot more about organics at the conference. We've got a great session that's planned. Tamara Schulman from EBA Tetra Tech's going to be there. She's going to be talking about a waste composition study that was done to determine the level of organics here in Metro Vancouver. Always Blue from Alberta is going to come and give us some things to think about in terms of getting energy from our food waste.
Okay.
And we're also going to hear from the National Zero Waste Council about some of the work that they've done, including that incentive program through the CRA. So there'll be lots of things to talk about at the conference in terms of organics and food waste diversion.
That's awesome. Lots of new ideas and new thinking. So,
Oh yeah, and there's always lots of networking and people come up with fresh ideas in those sessions. We're planning to have kind of a panel discussion at the end of our sessions so everyone can weigh in and really get things on the table for us to look at and think about.
Nice. That sounds like a great opportunity to talk more about these issues and get, a better perspective on what's happening.
Well, I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
So we'll see you next episode, and we hope to see you June 21st to 23rd in Whistler. So I'm Brock McDonald.
And I'm Harvajala, and we'll see you next time on RCBC TV.
Bye for now.